The imposter syndrome haunts many of us. For those who suffer from this difficult syndrome, I found that feelings of being an imposter stay entrenched even when others offer affirming validations. The persistent fear of not being enough, which often begins in early childhood, can lead to chronic feelings of self doubt and incompetence that override the truth that we are all valuable and deserving. When we dive into the genesis of our fears and self doubt, we can come to embrace our true aptitudes and worthiness. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. I suffer from imposter syndrome, not just at work, but everywhere in my life. I never feel like I'm truly good enough or worthy. Please give me some good tips for getting over this and creating better self esteem. I'm tired of being stuck. And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Manly, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Linda Sanderville. She is an MSW NRTY, and her specialty is being a self-love coach. Welcome to the podcast, Linda. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
So before we launch into the question of the day, Linda, could you tell our listeners a little bit about what makes you, you?
Oh, I'd love to. So I'm actually a psychotherapist and a registered yoga teacher, and both sides of the work that I do, I specialize in providing trauma-informed care to my clients. And the reason I do this is because I saw in my counseling practice just how widespread it is to have loss or grief or some kind of trauma in our backgrounds, whether or not folks ever end up seeing, a counselor or a therapist. It just seems to be the undercurrent of so much of what affects us in the day to day as women. And that's why I wanted to be able to provide resources and care that was really gentle, that was, not pathologizing people, but really seeing them as already being whole. And, myself is just the vehicle to reconnect them to themselves so they can, show up in their lives with a lot more vibrancy and joy and confidence to do what they want to do, whatever that is.
Thank you. That's so gorgeous. And we have something in common already. Not only are we both psychotherapists, but I'm a yoga teacher too. And I believe in the healing power of yoga when it's used as more than a form of exercise, when we use it mindfully. So I'm going to ask you a question. You mentioned women. So for our male listeners, are they going to be able to take away just as much as our female listeners?
Absolutely. I do work with male clients too. And really, they have the same needs, right? It might be in a kind of a different context. It might show up with different symptoms, quote unquote. But the men that I work with, they're also looking to heal internally because it's showing up in different ways in their external life, work, relationships, confidence, speaking, whatever it is. And so they will definitely be able to tune into this episode with us.
Good. So regardless of your gender, listener, this podcast will go through a lot with Linda and really soak up some yummy tips on self-love. So when we go back to the listener's question, the person is suffering from the imposter syndrome. And before we dive into that, and I know you work with imposter syndrome, could you describe what that looks like, what that feels like for the person who suffers?
Yeah. A lot of times what I'm seeing, because I'm working with folks who are, they're busy professionals, they are looking to advance in their careers or, grow their businesses. A lot of times what I see is one, there's a sense that you have to like earn your rest. So I need to work really hard now before I can take rest for myself, right? And so I would say in some ways that's imposter syndrome because it's as if we don't deserve rest right now. Like we don't deserve rest off the bat, right? The truth is that we need that to function. We need that to be creative and to have the ideas that are going to propel us forward in our careers. So if we skip over it thinking, well, I have to work hard first, I have to, blood, sweat, tears first, we actually can sabotage our ability to, show our genius and show our true capacity the ways that we really want to. So that's one, trying to earn our rest.
Well,
I think
let's
also,
pause for a
yeah,
second because
yeah,
that's
sure.
such I so when you say earn our rest,
Hmm.
does that mean simply because I never tied rest to imposter
Hmm.
syndrome, so I
Hmm.
love this. So slowing down to allow yourself to have timeouts during the day, to make
Yeah,
space for yourself to get to sleep on time,
yeah.
pieces like that.
Pieces
Let's
just like
dive into
that.
that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, one thing that is pretty common is that folks really need some freedom of time and space just to think, right? Just to think creatively, to brainstorm, to let ideas come to them. And where does that tend to happen? That tends to happen in quiet moments. That tends to happen when we're kind of bored, right? We're not busy doing a whole lot of things or multitasking, right? And so having space in which you can just settle down, whether that is sleep or that's, conscious rest when your eyes are open and you're still awake. Those are all moments where you can have some of the most brilliant ideas occur to you because your brain is constantly working in the background trying to solve problems for you. Right? That's the reticular activating system. We think of something, we have a question in our minds. How do we make this work? And our brain is trying to look for cues in our environment to solve that for us. But if we're always overtaxing our systems, right, overtaxing our brains, doing five things at once, getting to sleep and in a really exhausted state. So we're just kind of blacking out at night versus kind of gently floating into rest. We aren't giving our minds that optimal opportunity to actually be creative and to actually like bear that kind of fruit.
Okay, so
So,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
You're
no,
saying, I want to focus on, you keep bringing up the word creative. And
yeah,
let's focus on that in just a moment. But before we get to creative, for listeners who don't know what you mean by the reticular activating system, would you
hmm
give just a short layman's description, please?
yeah, absolutely. The short layman's description is that our brains are pattern seeking machines. Our brains are constantly looking for patterns. They're looking for, A plus B equals C. Like they want to know the formula for the thing that we are focused on. So if it's, relationships, how do I get a relationship? How do I improve my relationship? Well, I see these couples do this, this, and this. Let me try that, right? So we're just constantly looking for information for simple patterns that we can then take for ourselves and use in our situation. So the reticular activating system is really it's pattern seeking. It's looking to solve that equation. And that's the most kind of basic sense of what that means. That's really all you need to know about it. It sounds very complicated, but it's really quite simple.
Well, I love the way you explained it because it is what we do. People often disregard how much consistency matters and
Mm,
how much there's an undercurrent of trying to figure out, read a room, figure out a
yeah.
situation. And that's our brain trying to make sense of things so that we can feel safe. That
Yes.
primary need of safety. So I love how you brought us into the space of the reticular activating system because it is something that once we know it's running behind the scenes and it's
Right.
always doing this, we can learn to shift our patterns into ways
Right.
that work for us rather than against us. Because if we're doing the same thing over and over and over again and it's harming us or
Yes.
others, we just want to realize I'm not broken. I'm not stupid. I simply have all of these patterns that I might want to pause, reassess, and keep trying to train my brain to create different, neural pathways, different patterns. What do you think?
Absolutely. Right there. That's it. That's the beauty of our brains is that they are shapeable. Scientists usually call this plastic or neuroplasticity. The fact that the patterns that we make in our brain, all the grooves, like the literal physical grooves in our brain, they can be shifted. And that's what we're talking about right now is those patterns, those ideas that we have about how things work. Maybe the idea that we have about how things work that leads to, say, our imposter syndrome. Maybe some of those things are actually a little bit faulty, right? And not that we're at fault or I'm, blaming anyone who's listening. We all have these ideas, but maybe we can shift those beliefs and those ideas, with our brains and come to believe other thoughts, other ideas that are actually much more positive, much more helpful, and help us to finally achieve some of the things that we're seeking to achieve.
Thank you. Put so beautifully. So, if we go back for a moment to the listener's question and
Yeah,
we look at, let's imagine that this individual grew up in a household where they were criticized. We don't know this. I don't know this, but I'm painting a
sure.
picture where they were criticized, where they weren't given kudos for what they did well, where they weren't seen and attuned to all of these things. So showing up in life, if you don't know who you are, you're going to feel like an imposter everywhere you go because you never learned
That's
who you are at your core and never learned that that was valuable and wonderful and
right,
beautiful and priceless.
right.
So for this individual, then we can look that this individual's brain just learned patterns that said, I'm not worthy, I'm not seen, I'm not loved. And then it's about letting the brain, giving it some oomph and some tips so that it can go, I am worthy. I am loved. Oh, I can step into this role and do this. Oh, I can really stand in my truth. Oh, even before I stand in my truth, I can come to learn my truth. And all of
Yeah.
those pieces that feed into what I imagine would be the foundation of not feeling like an imposter, but feeling
Mhm.
like your genuine, strong, valuable self.
Right, right. Yeah, it's such a shame that so many of us carry this, right? It's not just this listener. I carry this too. My clients carry this too. I'm sure yours do as well. And um, thank goodness though, we have the opportunity once we realize, ooh, that's going on. I have a little bit of that funky stuff, right? This imposter syndrome idea. Let me take a look at it and do something about it. I think I just want to commend that person for even asking the question because to me, that signals that they're getting ready, right? They're getting ready for a shift because they're like, I don't want this. I don't want to feel this way about myself. It's not okay. And so I'm going to find out. I'm going to ask. I'm going to seek answers to help me deal with this issue. So I don't have to carry this any longer. They're making that an option, right? Just the fact that you're getting curious about, oh, maybe I don't have to think this way. Like literally, you've taken the first step. So I just want to point that out right there.
Absolutely. And I love when I get questions because it means whether from a client or a listener or whoever's asking me a question, a loved one, but for the listener's questions, it means that they want something. They're
Yeah,
curious. They want to change. Something doesn't feel good and they want to shift it. And that takes such courage. I just applaud it so very much. Now let's go back for a moment to the creativity because I truly didn't think of creativity as part of curing the imposter syndrome. I see the self reflection piece, where, as you
totally.
know, often we do sessions with clients and we say, okay, sometimes we want to give a little bit of homework or something, but sometimes the only homework is just go for a walk, do some
Mhm.
self care. Let your
Right.
brain do its work because the brain wants to sort it out. The brain wants, if we get out of the way and allow it, the brain wants the body, the mind, the spirit, they want to go toward healing. So,
Absolutely.
a little bit more, please, about the place of creativity.
Yeah, yeah. I really see creativity as being one of our natural states, right? When you look at children, I have two little ones, so this is always present in my mind. But when you look at children, they are born certifiable geniuses, right? Because they're looking at a whole world that is completely brand new, and they're just absorbing it all for the first time. They're taking in so much information, they're flooded with it, actually. But already they're sorting it into categories, they're making those patterns, they're curious about it all. And that's a natural state of receiving things in. And then they want to test it out. They want to throw the glass off the table. They want to use the crayons on the walls. They want to splash in the puddles, right? These are all different forms of like investigation and really diving in and manipulating the world around you. I see that all as a form of creativity. And so when we're in that natural state where we're at enough at rest that we can just be curious and notice what's around us, oh my gosh, like so much is possible in terms of us being able to find the solutions that we've been looking for and having the confidence to feel like, well, let me try it out. Let me experiment. Let me give myself a moment to maybe fail, quote unquote. I don't believe in failure for the most part, but right. But let me give myself the freedom to quote unquote fail at something because I'm exploring it, because I'm trying something new. So creativity is not just about taking up painting or doing photography, right? It's also about just trying things that are new for us and paying attention and being curious and delighting in it because it's being in that state also of a learning, right? We're just learning, we're taking it in, we're applying it in different situations. So that's what I mean when I talk about creativity and why rest is so essential to be able to allow that kind of engagement.
I love how you wove it all together and thinking of how you called children certifiable geniuses. It's so true. And I just wanted to take a pause for our listeners' question and for all of us to reflect maybe just for a moment on a time in your childhood where you felt that you were seen and somebody saw you and said, oh my God, you have this gift. You may, someday grow up to be this, or oh my goodness, you're gifted at this. Or conversely, if someone, and it's coming up for me as you were speaking, I could instantly remember one from my early childhood where I was tamped down, where it was the opposite. It's like, oh no, you don't want to do that. Oh no, this is not whatever it was, right? I remember what it was, but it doesn't need a space here.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's interesting because I ultimately came back to that in life, the no message. But we can
Yes.
see for our listener and for all of us just to take that pause and notice without judgment, no blame, no shame, but notice, was there a time in your life where you were, or maybe many times where you were given messages that were supportive? Or conversely, messages that told you to be less, to not
Yeah.
be your creative, natural, amazing, genius self. And that might be at the root of some cases of imposter syndrome. What do you think? It's such a touching
Yeah.
way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's deep yet you could go pretty deep with that one. Anyway,
Yeah.
back to you, Linda.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and tying this in, like as you were doing with the listener's question, I do find I know this was true for me, and I love that you pointed out that you came back to the no message. It's almost like a reclamation, right? You
Hmm.
reclaimed that part of you. Part of the message I was given, again, without going into huge details, was to be perfect, right? What was to not fail? You don't have the luxury to fail. Make sure you do it perfectly every time. Make sure you do it 10 times better than anybody else, right?
Ooh, that's a
Yeah.
heavy load to carry.
Isn't it? For a child or an adult, right? And the irony is now in my life, I'm in a place where I'm embracing the imperfection. I'm embracing the mess ups. It's getting to the point where it's just kind of rolling off me. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like life moves on, I move on. But so many of us are given that message that we can't be imperfect and we can't practice failure, practice at something. And so we can come to this state of being flooded with the sense of I'm an imposter. And oftentimes we're feeling that, I won't say 100% of the time, but oftentimes we're feeling that in areas where we actually do have a lot of experience, a lot to share, a lot of expertise. But it's almost like the more that we know, the more that we also know what we don't know. And so then we feel like, oh, it's not enough. It's like, well, it's enough to be very useful and beneficial to somebody else, more than likely. And so I think being able to identify that imperfection is totally okay. In fact, it's probably required. If we didn't have imperfection, we would never ourselves learn enough about that thing, be curious enough, be playful enough, right? To give anybody else anything, from what we've learned. If we were just perfect from the jump, no one would be able to relate to us. Most people wouldn't want to listen to us. They wouldn't want to be friends with us. They would feel bad being around us, right? The fact that we have imperfection that ties us into all of the rest of humanity, well, it just makes us a little bit more relatable, a little more lovable, actually.
I
I don't
love
love my
that.
husband because, yeah, I don't love my husband and my kids because they're perfect, because they're not. But their imperfections are part of what makes them so unique and so particular, and why I enjoy having them in my life, because of all of who they are, not because of just the things that they do really, really well.
And thank you for focusing on imperfection, because I think we do have those messages for whatever reason people get them. Like you got it. You have to be 10 times better than everybody else. Be perfect, be perfect. And many people get messages of that type. And then we grow up in some sort of straitjacket immediately, that if I am not perfect, then I'm not lovable, I'm not going to be accepted, and I'm not going to be safe, when in truth, no human being is perfect. Maybe there are machines that can get something to near perfection, but we are not blow up dolls painted in a factory. We
Right.
are. And so when we learn to just let go, I struggled with perfection for a long time. And now I look at it as, what areas do I need to really try to get it as good as possible? Like one of my books, that's where it's totally worth struggling for almost perfection if I can get it there, but then I could rewrite each one and do it
Yeah.
better the next time. So they're not perfect as much as I think they are once they're finished. I could rewrite them and condense them, whatever. And when we realize perfection is a moving target. And so let's just put out, especially for this listener, who we can imagine there's a lot of struggle with not being perfect underneath there, we can realize, wait a minute, we are all imperfect. No image out there, as pretty as it looks, of this person, or as handsome as this, or as great as the spread looks that we're seeing on Instagram or whatever it is, it's never perfect. It is about us noticing where we want to put our effort, where we want to put our energy, our thoughts. And if we're always pursuing this ideal of perfection, which does not exist, look at how much we're wasting our time and energy. And then it makes us feel like imposters in our own lives, because we are not the perfect, whatever it is, wife, husband, employee, partner, boss. And it's not possible. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Um, you're really pointing out the power of our choice, that we get choices and we get to be intentional about where we spend our most precious assets, right? Our time and our energy. So we get to choose that. It doesn't have to be everything, like you're talking about, that we need to kind of invest ourselves so heavily, right? So I see that as, you get to make a choice. And if you are able to make those more intentional choices about where you spend your time and energy, well, then guess what? You've opened up all these different avenues where you can rest more, because you're like, I'm not gonna spend it on that. So now suddenly you get an extra hour in the day, right? Maybe an extra couple hours on the weekend to just play, to just be, maybe listen to music, like whatever your thing is, right? Those spaces where you can feel like you are just yourself and you're getting to know yourself. I want to point out that so many of these unmet needs that lead to imposter syndrome or perfectionism or self sabotage, so many of these needs are rooted in our early life. You and
Hmm.
I both indicated that we have different memories that we're like, oh, I can immediately see when that person was saying this or whatever. So many of these early life experiences end up shaping these ideas, these grooves in our brains, these patterns. And so, if we're able to directly address in a very loving, gentle, intentional way those early memories and experiences, that allows us to really lift that, that idea, that belief up and out of our brains at the root. And then everything else, that we're trying to work on, within ourselves becomes a lot easier because that core belief has been addressed that has been causing a lot of those problems in the first place.
Thank you, Linda, for bringing up core beliefs because that is, we know as psychotherapists, what we're working with a
Yeah.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
The core beliefs, and of course, the trauma and all the issues that are held in the
Mm-hmm.
body and all of that. But the core beliefs, if our listeners don't know
Mm-hmm.
how powerful that is, and we're talking about core beliefs, but could you give a little definition about core beliefs?
Yeah, yeah. So core beliefs, they tend to be these usually negative, unfortunately, ideas that we hold about ourselves that then influence the way that we interact with other people and with ourselves and the world around us. And so it's very, how do I put this? It's very simplistic ideas, things such as I am not enough or I am not lovable, right? Or I will be abandoned. Just very simple ideas that when you say them out loud, oftentimes it seems really extreme. Like, okay, like who thinks that? But when we dial back, when we go from the like, wow, I feel like an imposter at work in comparison to such and such, such and such coworker. I feel like I'm not as effective or producing as much. When we kind of go deeper and deeper underneath like each of those instances and ideas, eventually we get back to, oh, I will never be enough. And so it can take some time to sort of process and to arrive there or to accept that that's what you really think underneath it all. But when you do, then you can also identify, you know what, I think I know where that started. I think I remember when I began to believe that the fear and have and internalize that fear that I might never be enough. And when we know where it started, and obviously like a trained psychotherapist or whomever can help with this, but um, then you can go back and actually walk that journey with your inner child, right?
Mhm.
Reprocess that memory, that experience, and do it in a way that brings you a feeling of wholeness and kind of like knits you back together again in the way that you should have been initially in the first place, right? So sometimes we can be in the present, we can be the answer to what past us, right? Which what younger child us needed back then. We can go back and give that to ourselves. And it's amazing how it shifts our mind, our perspective when we do that. And I can attest to that personally, and certainly so many of my clients can as well.
And so, for our listeners and the one who wrote in, when we're talking about inner child work, some people
Mm-hmm.
throw it away and go, oh, that sounds too strange, too odd.
Sure.
Yet the idea is, and I'm a wholehearted believer in inner child work, that when we have a trauma, trauma stays with us. Internal
Yeah.
messages stay with us for a lifetime. They're there. It's implanted in the psyche. It's there until we shift it. So if those messages are
Mhm.
good, those beliefs are good. The core beliefs are, I'm wonderful. I'm strong. I'm capable. I'm a good, valuable human being. That's the ideal, of course, when a parent sees and attunes to the child. But for many people, and particularly kids who grew up in really traumatic or difficult households, or had later relationships that really devalued them, any form of abuse, then those core beliefs become something like, in addition to the ones you outlined, they can become, I am not lovable, I am not worthy of love, I am not good, I am defective, I am just a stranger to myself, and thus not being able to be rooted, all of these and thousands of more of core beliefs. So if we look at the concept of being able to go back to that inner child who got stuck, because remember,
Mhm.
listeners, trauma stays with us. So if these messages were implanted in you from birth forward, or age 3 or 5 or 7 forward, they're still stuck nice and cozy in your brain. And so the work is, again, I like that you highlighted, it's often helpful to do it with the psychotherapist, but you can also do, well, I'll let you tell us, but someone can't afford psychotherapy or doesn't want to engage in psychotherapy. It sounds simple. It's like, oh, well, I can just switch from saying I'm not valuable and I'm not worthy to, oh, I'm valuable, I'm worthy, and now I'm fixed and go on my way. Going back to work with that inner child involves a lot of reprogramming. So could you explain to our listeners, other than seeing a psychotherapist, we know that the right psychotherapist can really do a lot of good work in that realm. What else would you suggest?
Yeah, I love that question. So, one of the ways, oh gosh, there's so many. So, as far as, ways that are completely free, let's say, I would suggest to, find podcasts by reputable clinicians who do hypnotherapy. So, I'm a hypnotist as well. And if you find some really high quality podcasts, you can actually listen to some hypnosis recordings where they're gently engaging you and kind of going back to a memory that, links to your feeling of imposter syndrome today. And so you can do that, and it kind of walks you through how to do that, how to connect, maybe some questions to ask yourself when you get there, some actions you can take when you get there. And so that can be a nice way to kind of dip your toes in, because there's no commitment there. It's not, a person that you're meeting with, but you can just kind of listen and explore what that feels like for you. Certainly different forms of movement are very helpful. You and I are both yoga teachers. Being able to do restorative, gentle, nourishing movement. And that could be literally as basic as walking, right? Just going on walks on a regular basis outside. There's something about that bilateral stimulation. That means it's engaging both sides of your body, right? As you go back and forth, moving your legs, if you walk with your legs. But that can also be really restorative and gentle to the body to help you reconnect and feel more centered. You can also look up, say, YouTube videos on breath work and do some guided breath work with someone who's also reputable. And that can be a nice way to kind of nourish your inner parts. I will say that when you're ready to dive deeper, it is very helpful to go to someone who has, more training in this area, who knows how to work with internal parts like internal family systems. And I won't dive too deep into that, but if folks are curious, they can always, find me and learn a little bit more about that. But that guides you in how to work with your inner child in a way that honors your mind's natural protection systems, because sometimes our mind doesn't really want to go there. And there's reasons why it doesn't want to. And we don't want to ever force it. There will always be a time when, it's like, okay, I'm ready. Let's talk more about this. Let's address this thing that happened in the past. But you never want to force it. You never want to see anyone who's going to make you like do that when your mind, your brain is not ready, right? But when you are being able to engage with your inner child in a way that honors your protection systems is a really beautiful way to go about that work.
Such good points. And I would like to add to listeners that I'm personally a big believer in journaling. That if you start journaling, and not journaling in a way where you criticize yourself, but you just allow the words to flow. Don't even worry about how the script looks don't worry about grammar. Just let yourself vent, or
Yeah.
onto paper, close it up, leave it be. If you want to look at it in 5 years, look at it in 5 years, open it up, and then just because the psyche wants to learn, it wants to grow. And when we give it space where it's not afraid of being judged or criticized, it
Mm.
is amazing how much pours out. And I love, asking people, just don't read it. And they'll look at me and they'll go, but I'm used to reading. And I said, well, when you read it, what happens? Well, I often like criticize myself, or I swore and this. I said, no, 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 no. Just then you're reinforcing that negative voice. So instead, just give yourself a safe space. Just like if you're going to therapy, you don't record the session and play it back and go over all the things that you said or didn't say, right? You just go and you allow yourself to vent and be heard. And I think that's another lovely tool. And I love how you brought up movement, because even being outside for a walk, if you're putting, your shoulders down and back and practicing putting your heart up to the sky, just acts like that. And you're right, the bilateral stimulation, left, right, is actually really soothing. And how
Yes.
does that tie into the question for you? Somebody might say, well, how is exercising going to tie into, unless I'm a triathlete and that gives me a sense of self-esteem, how is just going for a walk going to make me break free of some of this imposter syndrome?
Yeah. Well, let's remember that we are whole beings, right? So any way that anything that we're trying to address, we want to do it in a holistic manner. So just because something is affecting the way that we think about ourselves or feel about ourselves doesn't mean that our body is divorced from that, right? So we're physical as well. We're flesh and bone, and we have muscles, and right. So when we can engage all these different aspects of ourselves, that's where there's a lot of progress that can be made. So, going back to the reticular activating system, as I mentioned earlier, and how our brains are constantly seeking patterns as well as solutions and formulas. You could give yourself a question before you go on a walk. You don't have to do this, by the way. You can literally just go on the walk. Right? Like that's enough. But if you'd like to kind of engage a different part of your mind differently, you could give yourself a question, right? Like this person said, I feel like an imposter in every part of their lives. Okay, so is there any information that I've been given, either recently or in the past, that is contrary to this idea that I'm an imposter? Are there any instances in which actually I have been able to do something really good and positive for other people, or people have been really grateful for what I've given them, or that I'm just in their lives, or things that they really enjoy about me? What information is there that I've experienced that's contrary to this negative idea and these negative feelings that I'm currently having? Maybe just ask yourself that question, right? And then go on your walk. Don't think about it. just start walking, moving, left to right, scanning the horizon with your eyes, breathing full deep breaths as you go. And that's an experience of giving yourself some mental rest, right? Where your brain can be creative and can look for other patterns because you're asking a different kind of question now, right? And you're going to get different kinds of information. That's one way that you can engage with that. But really, the movement itself is so powerful because, again, we're whole integrated beings, and our body is involved with the thoughts and ideas we have about ourselves.
Absolutely. And I want to add on, a dear person I know gave me this feedback that was life-changing for me. I
Mm.
walk every morning, and she said, you seem a little bit, stressed lately. And I said, well, even my morning walk is filled with podcasts because I feel like I have to keep up with my favorite podcasts. And then I come, home, get ready for work, launch into the day. And she said, maybe take the first mile or 2 miles of your walk and just don't start your podcast. Don't listen to other people chatting or the news or whatever it is, but instead give that gift to yourself of just nothing. And it's been a game changer. Giving yourself permission. It was odd. I almost needed someone else's permission to just go blank slate. I don't, and thoughts will come in, but sometimes it's just birds and leaves and the sky or the rain, whatever it is. And listeners, give yourself the permission to just be. We're in such a do society that I really agree with you, allowing yourself, if you pose a question, like you said, you can pose a question, but you don't have to answer it. Just let your brain do it. And now I have a question for you. Linda, why did you say scan the horizon? Was there any particular reason?
So part of the you pick up on so many things. So part of the work that I do with clients is eye movement therapy based, and part of what that comes from is this bilateral stimulation. When we go on walks, both sides of our body are in sync with each other. They're coordinating with each other. But also for those, who can't go on walks, or even those who do, just literally moving your eyes from side to side engages a very similar response within the brain and the body. And what's even better is that when you're outside and you're looking far into the distance, there's just a different impact that has on us as human animals, right? That we can look far off into the horizon, letting our eyes scan the horizon. And really, this is something that we've been doing for millennia, right? Like humans have been looking and kind of noticing their environments, and making sure that they are safe, that they are secure, right? That everything is good. There's no predators out there. But it is a way just to kind of engage on a deep level with just how we're built and designed as humans. And it's incredibly restful and restorative for the body. And it can help you with even regulating your thoughts and appropriately sort of storing your memories. It helps your brain to kind of filter all that information in a way that is incredibly helpful and gets you unstuck in your mind with different things that might be going on.
I'm curious. I'm an EMDR. I'm EMDR certified. I'm guessing you're EMDR certified.
ART.
ART. Okay.
Yeah.
Listeners, I will put both of these in the show notes so that our lingo
all these
is
acronyms.
Yes,
I know.
so it's not a mystery to you. Thank you so much, Linda, for your time today. It has been incredibly beautiful, enlightening, informative. I believe you did a gorgeous job of addressing our listeners' question and anyone who suffers from imposter syndrome. So I'll put your listeners' show notes. You'll be able to find Linda. And oh goodness, thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can certainly find me on my podcast as well. I have a podcast entitled Love Yourself Liberated, ! So you can find me there. And then you can also find me at my website or on Instagram, Linda Sanderville. It's a pretty unique name. So look me up and come say hi.
Okay, and listeners, I'm going to spell Linda's name for you. It's LINDA. SANDERVILLE. Linda, it has been such a joy and a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you for sharing your time.
Thank you for allowing me to be on with you and your listeners.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for joining us today. This is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.